I want to move on now to single-use solutions. We do have quite a bit to cover, so I want to make sure we're covering everything. The poll question we asked, and this will help us, deliver our and talk through the next topic. What's your biggest concern regarding using single-use solutions? And so it looks like at about not a great majority, but cell damage during processing seems to be the biggest concern. And from lab bench to bedside, disposable processes, supporting regulations, and all that can be vastly different from autologous and allogeneic therapies. So, one, do you agree with what the viewers have said, and do single-use, ready-to-use disposable components and systems like play a role in scale, and why is this? And John, I'd like to start with you for this question.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the poll results, I'm actually struck by I guess the evenly distributed nature of the responses, right? I mean, you've got effectively 1, 2, 3, 4, half of the responses are probably within the margin of error for the number of folks who have responded. Sterility, cell damage, particulates, and then the closed system processing all come out fairly high there. And it's somewhat not surprising because there's, this is an area that is still burgeoning around single-use solutions in the world of cell therapy. And we're getting to a point now where I think you're going to start seeing more and more investment into this space because of what it can do to scale, going back to where the question originated. The big advantage of disposables, obviously, is that the changeover turnover times are lessened simply because you can dispose of them at the ends. So that means less manual labor to clean. They're obviously pre-sterilized, so there's a reduced risk of cross-contamination, all of which results in increased efficiency within that suite. I think that's effectively, and I guess one more thing to say is that at least in the world of cell therapy at the moment, we're running into less issues here in terms of availability of disposables because in the world of vector, I think it's a bigger concern at the moment, simply because those folks are competing against vaccines in the midst of a global pandemic.
Yeah, sure. And Mike, you and I, leading up to our event today, we had discussed this offline, and I wanted to get your thoughts on, regarding the single-use components. Do auto and allo differ? If so, what's your take, and even your perspective on the responses here?
So it's funny, when we talked about this, my answer was all of the above. Mm-hmm. But on that particular issue, it's one thing, when we scale up a autologous product, we're talking about, going to 5 liters, okay, to get a higher dose for a particular patient. And there's technologies that are actually very scalable from 100 mils to 5 liters. I can think of a couple, right? For the larger bioreactor systems, though, I don't know how that scale up will work for an autologous or allogeneic T cell. We see systems up to 2,000 liters in literature for these types of products. My background in cell culture is 10,000 liters scale, and we know that for a monoclonal that's relatively scalable, right? I just don't think there's a lot of experience. So going back to this characterization issue, we need to really think about, and product definition and life cycle, we need to think about scaling as we develop these processes. Think about the end point. When I look at this, just coming back to this poll, most of this is about sterility. But this one piece, cell damage during processing, is a pretty large thing. This was something we talked about 5 years ago. And it was like, you don't have to worry about it. But you do. And I think that as you scale up for an allogeneic product, you may have, if you have larger piping, maybe you have less shear forces. Thinking about physics, maybe it scales better at large scale than small scale. Maybe you have a better culture. We saw this in chromatography back in the early 90s when I was in purification. It needs to be investigated, but I think that just saying we're going to scale up with single-use systems and just say it works, you got to develop it. I remember a time years ago, I spent 46 hours straight in a clean room because it was just a filter. It's never just a filter. Everything needs to be developed.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to supply chain challenges. I feel like we can dedicate an entire hour just to this, but we know that it's about managing risk and having strong partners to work with to keep risk at a minimum. Speed to market is an important consideration, and we have to ensure that supply chains for the critical components can support product duration and mitigate potential delays. But John, I'd like to start with you. Talk to us about the differences in supply chain challenges that may hinder scalability, but yet provide existing solutions or maybe even best case scenarios for an autologous setting.
Yeah, this is an area of as we're building out capacity here at CBM, continues to be at the forefront of many of the things that we deal with on a daily basis, is really trying to understand how we can better forecast our needs against in some cases I think we're potentially in a worse case than say just an innovator company with defined products. So we're kind of the test case or the crash test dummy, so to speak, with regards to understanding how supply chain considerations in the midst of a global pandemic affect scale. I can tell you a little bit about our experience, what we're doing internally, and bounce that off of Mike as well. The number one thing we're doing is really using data to drive forecasting, predict demand, so that we can ensure that we're thinking about things in the right way with the right capacity on our side, as well as ensuring that the supply is going to be there to accommodate that. And so we have frequent, and when I say frequent, in many cases daily S&OP discussions, just to ensure that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing. Of course, a big part of this, and I think you've already mentioned this in the lead-in, Aaron, is having just top-notch supplier customer relationships. And one of the bigger problems that we've had personally is with certain suppliers changing lead times on us and then not informing. And so, the way to get past those issues is to have weekly, if possible, updates with them to understand the orders that have already been placed, as well as updating lead times associated with things that are longer expectation. And then another part of that is just to ensure from our ends and anybody who's in the world of manufacturing, really to try to ensure redundancy across your supplier matrix, right? If supplier A has the materials that you want today, the possibility exists that they will not have it for you tomorrow. And so we've gone to great lengths internally to really ensure that if that were to happen, that we have a default supplier for those things. And then wherever possible, what we've done is to, and I think this is a lot more, quote, doable with innovator companies, is to ensure that as you're developing multiple products, that they're utilizing similar reagents or supplies, because at that point you have redundancy of function in terms of manufacturing. And it also obviously lessens the burden on your warehouse operations as well. All of these things feed in then to scale from a supply chain perspective. And I think it becomes a different conversation after the pandemic. But at present, I think the bulk of what we do is just keeping our head above water to ensure that we're able to create the immediate demand rather than the longer term best case scenario for allo considerations or the like.
Yeah, sure. And Mike, I'd love to get your perspective on this, especially given your background. Like ensuring that supply chains for the can support product duration, and again to mitigate those delays, and what that partnership looks like. What's your take on that?
So let me just be really high level and then talk a little bit about how it relates to how we develop our products. So ideally, any supply for a process, if you can have everything be transactional suppliers, meaning lowest bidder wins and it's all the same stuff, then you reduce a lot of risk in your supply. The problem is I don't think we will never be there with cell therapy. But this is where risk assessment becomes important, right? What are the important supply components of your product? For example, serum, right? If we develop the product with a particular serum and we didn't explore other sources of that, you could be in a situation where you have to have a strategic agreement with that supplier, meaning your product its success in the marketplace depends on the success of that supplier itself. So, and also that takes rents it increases cost of goods because you're locked in with a particular supplier and they know it, right? So things like serum, media that can be very proprietary, sources of things like IL-2. There are multiple manufacturers of IL-2. Do they all work the same? When we develop our process, we should be thinking about this and exploring this. And this is, again, goes to what I'm talking about, post-approval changes, right? We have to be able to react to supply chain challenges. That, I think, is a key component of developing a cell therapy product, be it autologous or allogeneic. So my take on that is understand where those potential strategic suppliers lie, and then factor that into your product development plans so that you can get a few degrees of freedom there. Now, things like vector manufacturing, if you don't make your own vector, yeah, initially you're probably locked into one supplier because that's essentially its own BLA, right? Think about it there too. This is where your post-approval changes come in. Think about it long-term. You're supplying a market forever. Everything, strive to transactional suppliers. Use risk assessment to help you with that.
Beautiful. Okay. Mike, earlier, I want to make sure we're getting to patient scheduling, chain of identity, tracking all of that. And let's, keeping scalability in mind, for that autologous one patient, one dose, how does patient scheduling fit into this? Because I know it's a critical component. So talk to us about that.
This is for me?
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, sorry. I get glitches now and then. I said it before, right? So if we are supplying a market and it's on the patient's time, right? We have 28 days, let's say, to get from that apheresis to a product in that patient, dosing the patient. This relates to equipment utilization. If we can get to 70% utilization, meaning 70% of the time that equipment's making product, 30% of the time it's idle, waiting for product or under maintenance, then you're pretty golden, I think, in cell therapy. But what does that mean to cost of goods? If you're 50% versus 70% utilization, that's a 50% larger facility. More stations, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's how I look at it.